with that, we're going to kick it off. So basically kind of what we're going to do here today. Well, I'm Jared Larson. I'm our Whitetail marketing manager here at onX. Been working here for about a little over 5 years now. And fortunately have an exciting fall. So I'll chase whitetails in Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota. I've already been to Wyoming and Montana this year. So got a pretty good docket. And then I got Jack Headland here with me.
I'm Jack Headland. I'm in the marketing department as well. I'm normally the guy behind the scenes, flipping the switches on these master classes and getting things set up, but they drug me in front of the camera for this one. I don't have quite as exciting of a fall as Jared. I'll be hunting deer in Minnesota and Montana. So still a full season.
All right. Well, with that, first we're going to hop into the map here. So I'm going to share my screen. And as mentioned, please, if you have questions, it looks like there's already about 20 of them in the Q&A. So keep sending them there. And so I'm just going to kind of high level go over the main features that I'm always using in the whitetail woods. None of these waypoints are real meaningful. This is just an example map. So I'm going to start down here in Missouri. And so to kick things off, your map layers, that's where all of the rich content and data that our entire team at onX goes through and collects to ensure that you have all of the information that we can possibly provide you available at your fingertips, no matter whether you're in Missouri, Mississippi, or California. You're going to have individual state layers as well as specific nationwide layers. And so I'll just quickly kind of show you my state layers here, but we're really going to focus on the more nuanced features as they pertain to whitetail hunting in specific today. So Missouri, as you see here, I kind of got this property that's bordering a piece of public. I got it all marked up. And so you can easily just flip on and off private, public lands. You can see the color coding and the boundary lines disappear and reappear as I flip them on and off. Game management units, you know, I know in a lot of states in the whitetail world that those don't necessarily make a difference, but there's certainly some states that they do. And so you can click the details here and you can change the different game management units as it pertains to, you know, different species or different fire or weapon types, things of that nature. And then possible access, these type of layers, they're going to show you lands such as like timber company ownership lands or nature conservancy, areas that are in some instances open to hunting, in some instances not. And so that's really the onus becomes on you to look up with your local entity, whether it's the Nature Conservancy or Weyerhaeuser or whoever it might be, and see if hunting is allowed on that particular parcel. And then these black borders with the red polka dots. This is, in my opinion, one of the most valuable layers within the Hunt app for the states that have a walk-in hunting program. And so like Kansas, Weehaw's, you know, I believe they're the first one to have a walk-in hunting access program. As you can see, Missouri has one, and more states are starting to really try to ramp up that program. I know Wisconsin has volunteer public access, and Iowa has IHAP, and North Dakota and South Dakota have plots. So I would really recommend looking into that layer, as you can really find some hidden gems on private property that's open to public hunting. So I'm going to move more into whitetail specific layers that I think you guys should definitely know about. And so we're going to start with current conditions. So in this folder, you'll see a couple of CWD layers. And if you're a hardcore whitetail hunter, I'm sure you've heard about CWD. Depending on where you live, it may not affect you at this point. But these are basically some layers that show you counties with positive CWD results. So, you know, counties where they have found CWD positive deer in the wild, as well as the CWD zones. So some states have their state broken down into CWD zones, again, where deer have tested positive. They might zone off that spot, and you might be required to get your deer tested or dispose of the carcass at a designated facility And that's what these zones and locations show. And then the positive counties, as I said, just kind of shows where CWD has been detected. And so like Wisconsin is kind of a hotbed for CWD, as you can see. Many of the Dakotas have found some positive CWD. And then as you zoom in, when you see those yellow borders populate, those are some of the CWD zones. And as you zoom in further, you'll see like this little yellow triangle. You can click on that and you see right here, you know, that's a spot where you can go, we'll accept deer, you throw them in a dumpster essentially for the disposal of that carcass so it can be disposed of correctly. Because if you throw a CWD positive deer carcass that has some brain matter, spinal cord, things of that nature, just in a ditch on some public land, it's entirely possible that that disease can then spread to live deer. So just really important that we all help manage the resource and you know, dispose of our deer responsibly. So that's the main whitetail layer within current conditions. I'm going to go flip that off now. Is definitely worth checking out is, bear with me. So trees, crops, and cover. This is going to be the most interesting folder for you as a whitetail hunter, hands down. We've put a pile of work into gathering most of these layers within the last year and a half. And so I'm first going to start with the crop distribution layer. So if you've been using onX for a little while, when we switched the layer system in the last month or so, just depending on when that update came to your particular device, you know, it used to have its own folder of all of the different crops. Now we have combined them just to make it a little bit more seamless to find them. So you can turn on crop distribution as a whole, but what you're going to want to do is click this details button, because as you can see right here, this indicates that there's 19 crop layers. And so when you click details, you can go in and really dial in what crops you want to see. And so, you know, potatoes, peanuts, peas, and lentils, and cotton. I mean, there's so many different options here, depending on where in the country you live. But for all intents and purposes, while looking at Missouri here, we're just going to leave on hay, alfalfa, corn, and soybeans. And so you'll see as I zoom into the map here, it'll start to really just pick up a lot of color where these different crops are planted. So, and you scroll your mouse over and it's going to tell you what colors are represented there. So soybeans are that brown color, corn is the bright yellow, hay is the green, and so on and so forth when you have all these layers turned on. And before I get too far, yes, we're showing on web map right now, but everything in the mobile app looks nearly identical as far as the process to turn things on, as far as, you know, going into the details of a layer to turn those specific crops on and off. It's all the same functionality in the app. And so along with that, this data now, all of the data that is presented in the crop data is data from 2021. Of course, we were not able to go out and figure out what was all planted in 2022 to give you that real-time update. So what you can do then is just kind of rely on typical crop rotation, right? So if it was planted in soybeans last year, more than likely that's going to rotate into corn, and vice versa. If it was planted in corn last year, more than likely it's going to be in soybeans. You know, there's perennials, you know, hay is often kind of a perennial field. So if I see hay on the map, I'm kind of counting on that to be hay again. Same with alfalfa. And so if you're not quite sure how crop rotations work in many areas, Google can really be helpful. You're not sure what farmers might rotate wheat with, hop on Google and kind of figure out, okay, you know, more than likely they might, once they pull the wheat, put winter wheat in or something like that. You can start to build a bigger picture of what those food sources are going to be anywhere in the country. And so this data set covers over 19 million acres of crops, all the way from East Coast to West Coast. So definitely recommend checking that one out. Next, we're going to hop into, and I'm just going to turn off the crop layer. But as you can see here, we have a ton of different cover types. So wetlands, acorn producing oaks, thermal deer cover, and all these different tree types. And once again, I'm going to point your attention to the details part of these different layers of folders. And in the details, you can, herbaceous wetlands or woody wetlands. Herbaceous is going to be more like cattail marshes and sloughs, whereas woody wetlands is going to have, more of that like willow, dogwood, aldery type feel to it. So I'll flip that one on and see if there's any wetlands. And sure enough, you can start to see this blue overlay kind of pop up in these low-lying wetland areas. And so in a whitetail perspective, what I'm using this layer for is oftentimes, these wetland areas harbor really good bedding locations. A lot of times you're going to have to don waders or maybe hip boots, maybe knee boots at a minimum if you're lucky to get into some of these areas, which that in and of itself tends to keep a fair amount of people out and provides that very important security cover that mature bucks in particular just demand of a home range. So definitely worth checking out the wetland layer to kind of see, okay, this access on, like, this is a piece of public grounds here down in Missouri, it looks like. And so, yeah, Thomas Hill Reservation Conservation Area. And so that would be an interesting spot to me. It just looks like there's a lot of wetland throughout there. You might be able to find some access where, you'd get real soggy going in without having hippers, waders, something like that. So just gives you an idea of maybe where you can find some less pressured ground to hunt just based on, there being water around. The next is certainly by far and away my favorite layer we have, acorn producing oaks, especially for the time of year that we're coming into right now across much of the country. The bean fields and that ag that deer are going to early is kind of shifting into more of that mast crop that's starting to drop. And so again, in the details, you can just search for white oaks, red oaks, or mixed oaks. And we'll zoom in here. We'll find some more trees and I'll show you what that layer looks like here. So as you can see, there's mixed oaks throughout this stand of timber. I'm going to move down somewhere a little bit south of here, maybe into Mississippi or something. And we'll just look what's down here. Well, very, very few oak trees around these parts. And that's how this layer is helpful. You can kind of get a feel for what's around in any given area. Let's see. So here down in Mississippi, you can start to see where there's some really large bands of red oaks. See if we can't find any mixed or white oaks around here. So anyhow, I'm having a tough time finding any white oaks. As you can see, if I went north to Wisconsin, I'm sure we could find some in a hot second. But this layer is broken down in what we call pixels. So each pixel, which if you zoom in here, you can kind of start to see individual pixels. But this right here is an individual pixel. And that area is a 30-yard by 30-yard area. And what we show here is the predominant tree species in that area. So right here, the predominant tree species is red oaks, but that does not mean that there is only going to be red oaks there. And so what I use this layer for is not necessarily like finding the clump of oak trees that I am going to look to go hunt, but more so to get an idea of where there's a good ridge top of oak trees that I can then go put boots on the ground and go look at them in person to scout whether they're dropping acorns at any particular time or not. And often when I go on those scouts, I'll be packing in, whether it's my saddle or a tree stand, have my bow with me, and it'll be kind of like a hunt scout. If I find that mass crop dropping that I'm looking for, I'll probably set up and hunt it, especially if I find some hot deer sign around it. Or if I am not finding, that hot sign that I'm looking for, I'll typically just kind of keep scouting, keep going until I do find something of interest. And sometimes that never happens, but I would rather spend time with boots on the ground, finding areas of hot sign that's likely to lead to a good hunt in the future, than spend my time sitting in a tree over you know, something that's not dropping. There's no hot sign where I'm just kind of wasting my time, but I'm in a tree and it kind of feels like I'm hunting. So I always kind of prioritize scouting over hunting if I'm not dialed in on my particular spot. So acorn producing oaks, great layer to check out to find really those, you know, October and into early November food sources when acorns are hot. Thermal deer cover. So this is obviously much more applicable in the north than it is in the south. So we'll go up to Minnesota here and see if we can't stumble into some thermal deer cover. Go further north. And obviously thermal deer cover is going to be a lot of coniferous trees. So anything that's going to give that wind protection and, you know, a little bit of, here we go. Now it's starting to populate up here. So a lot of spruce trees. Again, you know, thermal deer cover being coniferous trees, they just offer more protection from, you know, sleet, rain, snow, but also it just breaks up the wind. So if you're on a late season hunt and you're looking for potential bedding areas, this is a great layer to throw on. And if you're pretty knowledgeable of different tree species and how deer use them in your particular area, you can really hone in on, you know, just looking for junipers, just looking for cedars, you know, just looking for spruce trees, which up here in northern Minnesota is kind of seemingly the highest density thermal deer cover around. So a great layer to use if you're looking for that late season habitat to hopefully harbor, you know, a mature buck bedroom. Next is deciduous versus coniferous. So this layer is one that I use a ton just at a super high level to find habitat diversity. And so habitat diversity to me is maybe the most paramount thing I'm looking for when I go to a new area. Pretty much all critters tend to really rely heavily on habitat diversity. And so if I can find an area that has, you know, this clear transition from coniferous to deciduous, and then on top of that, I'm going to flip to my topo map. And if I can find water in close proximity to that transition from deciduous to coniferous, which it's a little hard to see right now with these different layers on, but you can see that there's a creek down in the bottom of this drainage here. And so if I can find an area that can combine deciduous, coniferous, and water within a very close proximity, that's a great starting point to go put boots on the ground and see what you can turn up as far as deer sign goes. And again, you know, looking for that hot sign and fresh sign, finding deer sign that was made a month ago isn't overly helpful or, you know, overly productive to sit on. You're going to want to find something that's definitely within the week, fresh. And this can be even used on private lands, you know, spots that you've hunted for years. Sometimes you just don't quite, you're not quite able to put the larger picture together of that piece of property on exactly kind of where that transition zone starts or where it ends. And so flipping on these different tree species layer can really just give you very quick, clear insight as to, you know, where those areas are to really hone in and focus on. And so there's a few more tree species layers here, but we don't need to go down too many rabbit holes given the time we have. But certainly check out trees, crops, and cover under your layers tab to really hone in on these different, you know, tree species and crop distribution. And once you have all of those things kind of dialed in, you really start to understand the bigger picture of where a deer might be bedding and how he might be moving to food, just based off of a map before you ever even get to a place. And I think those, the Southern Rut Heat Map. So if you're in the South or ever hunted the South, you know how crazy the Southern Rut is. I mean, it can be different basically across the street in some areas. But as you can see here, as I kind of zoom out, you see this smorgasbord of colors. And so as you zoom in, it starts to populate all of the different areas and when their peak rut dates are. And so you can see here, in this corner of Alabama, it's that real late January, early February. Down here, it's February, even into March. You go a little bit north and you're in December. And so this is a really cool layer for those folks down in the South or traveling to hunt the South. And we worked with the National Deer Association as well as individual states and their biologists to put together this map to bring it to you guys. Just because the Southern rut can be such a mystery and a hard thing to put your finger on, which can be downright frustrating. So pretty cool layer to check out if you have an interest or are down in the southern part of the country.
And something on that, Jared, we get questions from people sometimes that are like, so you're telling me if I cross the county line, the rut's going to be totally different. It's kind of a, almost like a gradient. It gives you a good idea of when it's going to be. If you're kind of hunting right on that borderline, it's not like, you go 10 miles one way. It's, maybe it is going to be vastly different. I've never personally hunted the South, but some of the states, as you can see, like Mississippi there has kind of like that nice, they did a good job of kind of drawing it out that way of that gradient and kind of giving you a range. And, the rut can be a little different depending on conditions and all that stuff. So use it as kind of a guideline and maybe not as much gospel truth.
And as a whitetail hunter, I'm sure if you spend some time in the tree, you've went years where you wonder if the rut ever happens, even if you're sitting in Iowa, and other times where, the whole month of November was just nutty. So deer doing deer things, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I'm going to kind of move into some of the features that I think you guys definitely would find value of using in the whitetail woods here. So I'm going to zoom back up to that example property in Missouri, just because I have it set up with a number of features built exactly for whitetail hunters. And so waypoints are obviously a key part of the map. I'm not going to go into too much depth on just waypoints in general here. We have a bunch of webinars, including app 101s that Jack runs if you want just a super basic tutorial of app features. But within waypoints, you have a lot of options to do some pretty cool things. So for demonstration purposes, I am going to add a new waypoint. So I'm going to add this waypoint and we'll put it in this cluster of trees. You can name your waypoint, tree stand, make it whatever color you want. I'm going to keep on the blue scheme here. And then you can save that waypoint. I mean, you can add photos to it. You can add notes, so on and so forth. But once you save that waypoint, you have these two options. You have wind direction and waypoint radius. As you can tell, I use both of these tools a fair amount. Wind direction. So this one is my favorite feature within the Hunt app for whitetail hunting. You can do two things. You can show the current wind. So it's just going to always have this indication bubble that shows up as white when you show the current wind, or you can set the optimal wind. So let's say this is a tree stand that you hung and you hung it specifically for those, predominantly northerly winds coming in November here. So you can say this stand hunts on a north and a northwest. You can apply that. And then that's going to tell you, okay, it's out of the west today. Because I selected northwest, it's given me that orange bubble saying it's a marginal wind. You might be able to get away with it. Whereas red is obviously bad and green is obviously good. So what that does for you is just at a glance, you're able to see as many tree stands as you have on your property or the public you hunt or on your lease, where it has favorable wind conditions on any given day. And then waypoint radius. So we'll go to that same waypoint and we'll add a radius. And so let's say this tree stand is really close to a bedding area and it's super hard to get in there. So you want to determine, how far away that tree stand is from that bedding area that you hung it to hunt. And so let's say it's 60 yards. And so you can apply that. And then when you zoom in on this waypoint, you can see there's a 60-yard radius around that waypoint, which allows you to visualize exactly, how far that tree stand is from a bedding area, from a food source that you have a deer hitting, from a water source. Maybe you can't discharge a firearm within 200 yards of a dwelling on some public property that you hunt. Anything that you need to gauge distance from a particular point, this is a super handy tool that is obviously super quick to turn on and off, and you can change, the radius of it at any point in time. And so I use it just to quickly check exactly the things that I just mentioned, proximity to bedding, proximity to food, things of that nature. I've also used it when setting my trail cameras to, ensure that I'm not putting two trail cameras within 50 yards of one another, because I'm honing in on a particular buck and I'm trying to get his core area figured out, but want to stay separated a little bit to increase my odds of getting a picture of him or whatever. So a ton of different options for that tool.
One more use case, Jared, is after the shot. Let's say you ranged the buck and it was exactly 33 yards, but you're hunting some thick timber. And when you get down from the stand, everything looks different. If you set that radius to 33 yards, then you at least have kind of a perimeter to know where to start looking for your arrow or looking for that first drop of blood, to help you kind of hone in on that a lot easier.
That is a super good call. I've never even thought about using it that way, but I really like that for tracking deer. Make a marginal hit. Maybe it's like you're a little back. You think it's a liver shot. Most liver shot deer really don't go that far. But if you don't have good blood, you could set a radius of 200 yards and just grid that entire radius and make sure you've covered every area, on those tough blood trail jobs or things of that nature. Yeah, I like that one, Jack. Good call, man. So with that, when you set optimal wind on any particular waypoint, we automatically create you a wind calendar. So again, you're not going to have a wind calendar until you set optimal wind on a waypoint. But once you do so, you can just say only list content visible on screen is what I'm going to flip this slider on to show. So it's only giving me the wind calendar for these waypoints that I'm looking at right here that I have optimal wind set on. And so it's going to give you the 7-day wind forecast at sunrise, midday, and sunset. And we're pulling from over 100,000 weather stations. So you're going to have pretty dang accurate weather no matter where you're at in the country. And this, again, just allows you to forecast and plan out your hunts ahead of time. Let's say you have a buck that's really hitting this wooded finger stand, and you're going to flip through here and hopefully find a day of good wind. Well, if you're trying to hunt that stand, you're SOL. There's no good wind in the forecast, but valuable tool just to kind of forecast your hunts, when you might be able to get in, especially if you're a weekend warrior or you're only able to hunt, a couple mornings here or there. Really just allows you to maximize the time that you're able to spend in the field hunting on favorable conditions. And then one of the last features I want to show you guys is super new within the Hunt app here. I'm just going to create a new little spot. We'll go to Bachman Holdings here and drop a couple waypoints. I'm just going to leave them as red X's for time's sake. But you can do this on any private property. It doesn't work on public property just yet. But what you can do is, so let's say you have your lease or your, property that you own or wherever you're hunting whitetails. You can click on that property. And of course, you're going to get the land ownership data that we are known for, Bachman Holdings, tax address, county, acreage, so on and so forth. But if you use these cards up top here, you get hunt units, range, radius. This is a pretty cool one. Weather. If you click anywhere in the country, you can quickly just pull up the weather on that exact location. But what I want to show you is this content tab. And so if you click a property, select that content tab, and then click select, you can then select all of the content within within that boundary. And from there, you can click this add to folder button at the bottom. And so with 2 waypoints, not the most useful thing, but if you have 20 waypoints and all your tree stands marked on your property, you can add that to the folder, example folder, save that. And so then all of the content within a property that you click will automatically be added to that folder once you click that add to folder button. And then you can go in to your My Content tab. Here's that example folder, and it's going to have all of your content in it that you have on that property that you selected, which makes it really, really easy to use our share option. So on mobile, you can text it, you can email it, you can send it pretty much however you want to. But then you don't have to hold your buddy's hand walking him to a tree stand that he's never been to, or draw him a map on a paper napkin to turn by the big oak tree. You can simply share him your entire property's worth of content in one fell swoop. That way he has all of the information to walk himself to the stand. You guys can use our tracking feature, is one feature that isn't really displayable in a masterclass setting. But if you use our tracker within the Hunt app to track entrance and exit routes into your tree stands and out of your tree stands, that is one that I use a ton. And then I'm sharing that to buddies. That way they can get exactly into the tree stand. They don't need to have a bright headlamp on. They can just follow the Hunt app, get right to their tree stand and get to hunting. So as a reminder, to get to that feature, you click on a private property and you can scroll over in the card that pulls up to content, select all, add to folder. And that is how you can kind of create your custom property that you can then share with those hunting buddies. So those are kind of the major features that I wanted to touch on to make sure that you guys knew about for this upcoming whitetail season. Jack, anything that you have that I kind of missed here?
Man, I think you pretty well nailed it.
Perfect. I guess I'd be remiss not to mention offline maps. Again, not super conducive to web map in the masterclass setting, but it's on your app. It's going to be the same thing as you see here. You can save a new offline map. And then you just overlay the box of the area, whitetail, lease, and you can save that. And if you do it on web map, it's automatically going to send it to your account within the phone app. So if you tap on offline maps in your phone app, you're just going to have the option to quickly hit save. And it's going to save that box for you on your phone app. And then you can throw your phone in airplane mode and use your phone just as you would if you were at home on Wi-Fi with absolutely no service. So I know there's a ton of places in the whitetail woods that don't have service. So make sure you're using those offline maps.
That reminds me of a question we got, Jared. Somebody had wrote in and asked for tips on saving battery life, especially if they were doing multi-day hunts. And that seems to be more popular. Most people hunting whitetail country are going to be back to the truck or back to a cabin or a house at night. But I've been hearing about more and more people backpacking in, whether it's in West Virginia or the North Woods of Michigan, Minnesota, or out west here in Montana. Saving offline maps is the first kind of piece of that puzzle that Jared mentioned, going into airplane mode. The two biggest draws on your phone's battery life are the screen and if it's searching for service. So if your phone's always trying to connect to a tower, that's going to drain your battery very fast. So if you download your offline maps, put your phone into airplane mode, and then, you're not watching videos on it or playing games all day in the tree stand. If you have the screen off, you can get a couple of days out of a phone a lot of times if you're kind of using it sparingly. I have it right here. I've got this little battery pack. It gets me 2-3 charges. Carry one of those, it weighs about as much as my phone does. And then with that combined, you can get yourself a couple of days for sure, and still have the full functionality of the app when you're offline.
Yeah, those are all great tips. And then I would say the only feature to use it sparingly if you're trying to conserve battery life is our tracker. We've continued to vastly improve the lack of battery life that it takes. But if you're relying on your phone for a 3-day backpack hunt and you only have a battery pack that's going to charge it once or twice, the tracker is going to eat up more battery than anything else. So I would forego that one.
Yep, good point.
So there was a ton of questions that were asked on registration to talk about what we look for in funnels, pinch points, natural things occurring in vegetation or terrain that is going to cause deer movement to be constricted. And so I'm just going to quickly touch on the couple things that I'm always really looking for. And this area right here is a great example. And so when I'm looking for this stuff, I'm always using the hybrid base map. It just really shows the topography well. We have the water popping in hybrid, but then you can also see the lay of the land from an aerial imagery perspective. And so what I'm really looking for here, especially in these more terrain laden areas, is main ridges with multiple finger ridges coming off of them. And so this is exactly one of those here. And I'll flip on topo just to kind of exaggerate it a little bit. But you can see this long drawn out ridge top coming right here. And there's multiple saddles on it. So right here's a saddle. You can see there's a high point here and a high point here, a saddle here between these two high points. And so I'm always interested in saddles, particularly in rut hunting situations, but more than saddles, I'm interested in finger ridges coming off of main ridges. And so I'm just going to use our line tool to really make it obvious what the main ridge is here. So this red line is going to represent our main ridge. And then I'm going to use some blue lines to represent these finger ridges that I'm talking about. Bear with me as I draw a couple of these here real quick. I'm not going to cover all of them because this is a pretty sweet little chunk of property and it has a bunch of finger ridges, but you guys will understand what I'm getting at here. But so as you can see, you have this main drawn out ridge. And then, I mean, there's a finger ridge here. There's a finger ridge here. There's a finger ridge here. There's one coming right off the tip. There's another one there. And so what these finger ridges provide is they provide excellent bedding cover for a number of reasons. Because they're elevated with this terrain, there's going to be some thermal play. And so thermals, if you're not real familiar, in the morning, thermals will typically be falling until the sun starts to come up enough where it's kind of generating that warmth. And you can kind of feel it when it switches. And then those thermals will go up pretty much all day until, right around sunset, maybe a little bit before sunset. Those thermals will then start to drop. And so deer absolutely use thermals to their advantage. So they can bed on these finger ridges, be elevated, typically be looking down the hill and having thermals or the wind at their back. That way, it just gives them that security cover. And so on rut hunts in particular, ridges like this with all these different finger ridges that provide ample bedding cover, I would be banking on family groups of does to be using these finger ridges as bedding cover, and bucks running these ridges, scent checking does, really, again, just looking for those estrus does in the rut. And so that's one terrain feature that I'm really looking for. And another one that's also very obvious in here is I would consider this a funnel. I'll draw an area shape around it here to, again, really depict what I'm talking about. But inside of this area shape, you can kind of see how these topo lines, they almost exemplify a funnel, if you will. All the topo lines are coming up into this point here. And so when deer are traveling this, they're no different than us. They're going to be walking the easiest path possible. They don't want to put out extra effort to get up a hill, just like you don't. And so many times they're going to follow that funnel right up the gut and into one of these saddles. So right here's one of those saddles I was talking about previously. This would be a very interesting spot, in my opinion, as you have this creek bottom down here, this big natural terrain funnel that comes up to this saddle, that to me is just going to be an area of interest that more than likely bucks are going to be cruising from this drainage up and over this saddle into this drainage. Again, just finding those easy to travel routes to get from bedding area to food source, cruising for does, cruising for mast crops. If there's a bunch of oak trees on this ridge, but not a lot, there's not one concentrated source and they're just cruising through. I'm always looking for terrain funnels as such. And really the last piece that I'll cover here, and then I want to get into as much Q&A as possible for the next 15 minutes, is vegetation created pinch points. And so here's a pretty good example of one. You have this big chunk of timber here, big chunk of timber here with this open field, but you have this finger of timber that comes out. And so deer in general, but particularly mature bucks, they're not going to walk across this wide open field in daylight. They're going to follow the cover and they're going to follow this tree line and connect to this other main block of timber. So anywhere where you can kind of find narrower pieces of vegetation, or like a fence line, for example, is a great pinch point that is often created, especially if it's like a tightly strung four wire barbed wire fence. If there's a spot where that top string is down, or there's a gate in it that's open for farmers, deer absolutely pick up on those things and they are going to use them. So just take note of things exactly like this little area here, where there's clearly a vegetation created pinch point that deer are going to be more likely to travel than in the surrounding areas. Again, they're not going to walk across this open field if they don't have to. So focus on the cover where they can stay concealed, and you can be an opportunity for a shot. So those are kind of the big things I'm looking for, is drawn out ridges with a lot of finger ridges, those naturally created funnels by topography. And if you have less topography, you're really going to have to focus on vegetation created pinch points. So those would be the 3 key terrain features that I'd recommend looking at this fall. So with that, I know there's quite a few questions. Jack, if you want to kick some questions over to me or answer some questions on your own there, please send some my way.
Yeah, when we got in, what advice can you give on spot and stock hunting a river bottom? So something people do, out here in Western Montana where we both live,
Yep.
A lot of different places, river bottoms hold a lot of deer. What do you recommend?
Yeah, so I'm already looking at a river bottom here. This might not be the best example, but we're looking at it, so I'm going to use it. And so I'm going to flip on our 3D map here and use our 3D elevation exaggeration, probably a feature I should have told you about already. But as you can see, it really just distorts that terrain so you can understand, what it's going to be like when you get there a little bit better, because, looking at a map is great. It's invaluable, but it's always a little bit different when you get there in person than you think it's going to be. And so this elevation exaggeration, we're just trying to bring it into life for you. But my big things when I'm spot and stalk hunting is glassing. You want to find an area that you can get up high and you can see, because as the name alludes to, spot and stalk, it's not guess and stalk. So it's really hard to be successful if you don't have a high point where you can look out and glass a long ways. So I'd be looking to try to find somewhere on this knob that I could set up and glass and look down into this bottom. And the absolute number one tool for spot and stalk hunting is right here. It's the onX Hunt app, and it's dropping waypoints exactly where you saw that deer. And there's a mistake that I've made many times in my past, and that is I see a critter that I want to go kill in a spot and stalk scenario. I see him, I mark a waypoint on him, and I go. And I've learned that patience is always the better move, even if that means, you kind of blew your opportunity. Maybe the deer crossed a fence and he went onto private, and you no longer can hunt him because you sat there and watched him for 30 minutes. But on the flip side, probably would have happened anyway before you would have got there to get a shot off. So drop a waypoint exactly where you see that deer. You know, a couple tools that I'll use in order to help me figure that out is, you know, drop that waypoint on about where you see them, and then use the line distance tool. If I'm sitting on this knob, I'm going to measure, okay, that deer I saw is 606 yards away. Then I'll take my rangefinder, range where that deer was, 610 yards. Okay, I got to have them pretty close there. And then, of course, if you can go watch that buck bed down, then you're really in the money. If he goes into some thick stuff and you just got to guess, well, at least you have a starting point and you can be dang sure that you're in the right zone. But really, glass, drop a waypoint on that buck, make sure that you have them marked in the exact right location, be patient, go kill them.
Awesome. That's good stuff. Going to maybe a little bit of a different part of the country. I hunt in the northern woods of Wisconsin, your home state, Jared.
Yep.
The deer browse on anything, so really no specific food source since everything is food. What do you look for when setting up a hunt stand?
So if I'm setting up a stand, we're going to go to northern Wisconsin here and we'll go poke around. Oh, let's see here. All right. So this is what I'd be doing if I was in northern Wisconsin. I'm guessing you're probably asking about public land. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my hunt map layers. And just as I talked about with trees, crops, and cover, I'm going to flip on deciduous versus coniferous, this layer right here. And I'm going to go in and immediately locate habitat diversity. And so again, red is deciduous. This tan color is coniferous. And then on top of that, I'm looking for water within close proximity. So this very spot is interesting to me. I don't love that this 2-track is as close as it is. But at the same token, there's a lot of people that refuse to hunt super close to the road. Everyone blows by it and the deer feel comfortable there because they don't get pressured right there. So this spot has all the intangibles. It has these transition zones of habitat diversity from deciduous to coniferous, and there's water. And so that type of area is exactly what I'm looking for to find that habitat diversity and water. I mean, I really got those tips from my buddies over at the Hunting Public. Aaron and Zach have always preached habitat diversity. And I don't think anything that they say, I basically hold as the Bible of deer hunting. And I've found plenty of success with it myself. So that's what I'd be doing in monotonous or largely monotonous areas with few food sources that are really, you're able to hone in on, find habitat diversity, find water, and you'll find deer.
And I can kind of add to that. I grew up hunting northern Minnesota and still hunt there, so not totally different. And the area we hunt is about as flat can be. I remember one time measuring, I was sitting on onX and measured the distance between two topography lines, and it was like 1.5 miles. You know, so in that 1.5 miles, there was like 20 feet of elevation change. And it's a pretty swampy area where we hunt. So that wetlands layers is what I use quite a bit of, because especially the mature bucks, you alluded to it earlier, that's where they hang out. And especially, I know this is kind of an archery focused class, but Minnesota, we've got that little bit earlier rifle season that opens up. And when the shooting starts, bucks are heading for those swamps. There's a big tamarack swamp, the area we hunt, and that's where they go because people aren't hunting it. It's thick, it's nasty. You're probably going to need waders some years to get in there. So we set up stands sometimes right on the edges of those swamps, try to find if you can get where there's some coniferous, some deciduous, some wetlands, kind of like you got there. Yeah, basically what you said. Deer are creatures of the edge, and an edge can be a lot of different things. It might be the edge between a swamp and an oak flat. It might be the edge between a big stand of spruce and some aspens. Going to be different wherever you are, but if you can kind of hone in on those areas, that's the place to be.
Yeah, and I mean, woody wetlands, like dogwood is a browse that deer certainly love, and young willows versus herbaceous wetlands, which that's going to be more just like true bedding cover. So I'd really focus on those woody ones.
Let's see what else we have. We'll maybe do one more here. Kind of a different question. Hunting public land, any advice on getting a step ahead of other hunters? So everybody's kind of got, a lot of people have onX now. We all kind of have access to the same information. A lot of people say there's no secrets anymore. What do you have for still kind of getting the edge on the other folks out there?
Yeah. So, not that these are novel answers. They've certainly been covered before, because I think this question has been asked every possible way under the sun. But a couple things that I'm looking for is, again, I'll go back to the private lands open for public hunting. So I'm looking at Wisconsin voluntary public access. I'm going to flip that layer on. Wisconsin forest tax law. Anytime that you can find these more nuanced lands open to hunting, folks are unsure if they can hunt it. They're not confident they can hunt it. They don't know about it. That's my first and foremost recommendation. My second recommendation is, so many people tend to flock to the larger chunks of public. So looking at this area, this is going to be the most hunted chunk of public, guarantee it. But this one, on the other hand, very well may get overlooked because there ain't a whole lot going on, and it's only 80 acres. If there's one car there, that's probably going to be it. So that's the other thing, is I really focus on small or very abnormal shaped parcels if I'm looking to get away from crowds. And then the last thing that I'll really look at is, how can I get creative with my access? Is there an access point where it is just a hellaciously steep ridge that's the first thing you got to climb when you're out of your truck? Is there a creek that takes chest waders to cross? Is there zero trees on that piece of property and just like swampy, brushy nastiness? Those are all things that are going to deter people from being very interested in that piece of property. Thus, I'm very interested in it. But at the end of the day, those tips have been thrown out every which way by, the likes of the hunting public, the guys from the Element, Meat Eater, you name it. So at the end of the day, there's no replacement for getting the lay of the land, putting miles on your truck, miles on your boots, and going out and personally figuring out where people aren't, because that is where mature bucks will be. So there's a couple other quick question, like one that I liked. Do you only hunt a perfect wind? So my dad, he's been known to say that mature bucks die on marginal winds. And I have found that to be incredibly true in the mature bucks that I've killed. So I'm a very aggressive archery hunter. I don't hunt a whole lot of private land. And if I do hunt private land, it's usually just for maybe a week time period. So I definitely hunt marginal winds. You can get by. I have an Ozonics. If you guys aren't familiar with Ozonics, I'd highly recommend encouraging it. They're not cheap, but they have definitely, I'll credit them to for sure 2 mature bucks that I killed on very marginal winds. I would just use all the tools that you can. Jack, you got any other quick to answer ones?
I was just going to add to that one. It seems like people talked about this a lot years ago and isn't talked about as much as hunting high. If you can get up higher in a tree, it seems to have helped me sometimes as far as them not being able to wind you as easily. Either your scent's kind of dispersed more, or you're hunting so high that it's blown over the top of them. Obviously be safe in all of this. And, some states have different laws as far as how high stands can be, but you and I both hunt out of tree saddles quite a bit. It's a pretty safe way to go. Maybe it's hauling in a couple extra sticks or using an aider or something like that to get high if the wind's going to be swirling or not quite perfect.
Yeah. Also, we forgot to drop the giveaway link. That's my bad. We're going to drop it right now. We're going to put it in the chat. We're also going to put it in the key. Well, we're going to put it everywhere we can. So go click that giveaway link. It's going to only be available to those in this webinar and for the next 12 hours. So click it, fill it out right now. There's a couple questions. Define marginal wind. Let's say I hung a stand that is an absolute dynamite stand on a north and a northwest wind. A marginal wind would be a west wind or a northeast wind, something that is just off your preferred wind direction. What's another one here that is, what advice would you give to hunting clear cuts from a fresh cut to within the last 2 to 3 years? Like everything else I've said, hunt the edge. Deer are critters of edge habitat. If there's a clear cut, they're going to be really utilizing those edges to find that most recent browse. And they're probably, if it's 2 to 3 years old, they're probably going to be bedding in that clear cut because it's going to have enough of that young, thick undergrowth that they can find that security cover and also have food in very close proximity. Yeah, a ton of great questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to answer them all. We are about 2 minutes from our time limit here. So once again, that giveaway link is at the bottom of the chat. Please go click that giveaway link, get entered. We really appreciate you guys coming out. Check out, if you go to onxmaps.com and then you can go to the Hunt app, you can find a Masterclasses link there that links to our page of Masterclasses. We put on at least one of these a week. Sometimes they're whitetail focused, sometimes they're elk focused, sometimes it's Jack running you through app 101, teaching you everything that you need to know about the onX Hunt app to be more successful. So again, really appreciate you guys coming out. Best of luck this fall, everyone. Have a great season and shoot straight out there.
Thanks, Jared. Like he said, good luck to everybody, and we hope to see some success. Let us know how you do this fall. Have a good one.
Appreciate it, everyone.